Welcome to TTELT, Teaching Tips for English Language Teachers, a program of educators worldwide. I'm your host today, Melanie Gobert. My guest today is Dr. Christine Coombe. She's an associate professor at Dubai Men's College and a past president of TESOL International. Today's topic is preparing students with test-taking strategies. Dr. Coombe, let me ask you a first question. Why is the teaching of test-taking strategies important?
Well, Melanie, I think in most contexts, about half of a student's grade overall is based on how well he or she does on tests. And of course, there is a lot of research out there that shows that we can improve our test scores by the systematic instruction in test taking, as well as helping our students acquire anxiety reduction techniques. So I really feel that teachers have a responsibility to make test taking as non-threatening as possible for our students. And I think that students who don't have test taking strategies are at a distinct disadvantage in today's culture.
And how do you teach test-taking strategies to your students?
Well, I look at 3 points in time. I look at before the test, during the test, and after the test taking strategies. So some before the test strategies might be, first of all, to help students put the test into perspective. At the end of the day, a test is only a test. And even though in many countries around the world, how well a student does or does not do on a test can be critically important, more often than not, students do get a second chance at tests. It's also important to put the grade into perspective. And I got a lesson when I was in my doctoral program about how it's not about getting an A in a class. A is important for GPA, of course, but at the end of the day, for us as English language teachers, it's about how well our students can speak English after they leave us and after they leave our institution. I think another good strategy for students is that they should learn about the exam. You know the old adage, forewarned is forearmed. So it's important for students to learn about how they will be tested, what kinds of questions they will encounter as well. It's also important for them to develop reasonable expectations. You know, if at the final exam, a student has a C or a C minus average, and they often come up and they ask you, Miss, what do I have to do to get an A in your class? Well, obviously, that's probably not statistically or mathematically possible. So developing reasonable expectations is important. Again, taking care of basic needs before an exam, sleeping well, eating right, getting exercise, engaging in stress-free activities is important. So relaxation techniques as well. So investing time in planning, and of course the all-important coming to class before all the time, not just before tests, because you can't really be expected to learn or to know a lot of things for tests if you're not there as well. If we look at the start of the test strategies, when I always tell my students, when you get your test paper, preview the test paper before you jump into answering things, okay? So things like reading the directions carefully can save you a lot of time and effort. Answering the sections of the test that you think are easy first, so you can build up your confidence. Keeping pace with the exam, and that means keeping track of where you are and how much time you have left is important. When you look at during the test, you want to make sure you answer all the questions. And, depending upon if it's a computer-based exam, sometimes you can be penalized for answering questions incorrectly. So you want to make sure you answer all questions if it's paper-based. Making a reasonable guess is very important as well, or an educated guess on something. Research shows that you shouldn't go through the exam randomly doing answer changes. You should only change your answers if you have thought of other content that you know is going to be correct. Now, during the test as well, if there's something you don't understand, of course, you can ask for clarification from your teacher or from the exam invigilator. But don't ask questions of teachers to try to get inside information on the test. You also want to keep up appearances. Make sure you're right. I know it's difficult for me because I can't remember the last time I wrote something besides my signature. But many times these days we have paper-based tests, so we need to make sure that our handwriting is legible as much as we can. Now, during the test as well, you want to ignore any distractions. And one of the most common distractions during a test is that a test starts and then a few minutes later, a student gets up and hands their paper in. Now, more often than not, when a student does that, it's because they can't answer any of the questions. But what students in the room think is that that student is so good, it only took them 10 minutes out of 60 to answer the whole question. So they often get nervous and they think, oh, I'm not doing well, it's taking me too long, etc. So they should remember that the test taking experience is theirs and theirs alone, and they should focus on their test experience and try to ignore distractions around them. Of course, checking answers is critically important. And most test developers like myself, we build in extra time so that students have enough time to go back and check their answers if it's paper-based, and often backtrack on an online exam if it's a computer-based test. So checking answers is important as well. Now, after the test, of course, you're going to be kind of nervous. You might have some test anxiety. It's important to try to relax. Most teachers, we want our students to get the results of their test as soon as we can possibly do them, but oftentimes it's not an instantaneous kind of procedure. Sometimes students have to wait as much as a week before they've taken an important test before they can, get their results. So I think that, making sure they engage in, again, more relaxation activities, and then kind of move forward within the content in waiting for their grades. Remember, giving washback, that's the technical term for it, is an important property that teachers engage in when they do tests. And that washback is the feedback that is given to various people, not only the students, but the administrators, the test developers, the curriculum developers, etc. So I think that I'd like to end by saying that the literature out there is really clear on test-taking strategies and their importance for students. So I think oftentimes it's the English language teacher that I don't want to say gets stuck with this job, but I want to say has the opportunity to engage in some test-taking strategy instruction with their students. So there you have it, Melanie.
Sorry, I would just have one last question. We have so many online testing opportunities going on today. What are there any particular strategies you would teach students about online test versus paper-based test?
I think for the best one for online tests is that students have to keep their equipment to the standard. I often see here in the Gulf where I teach here in Dubai, students have the latest phone technology. They've got the latest iPhone, etc. But sometimes you look at their computers and their computers are falling apart, there are keys missing, etc. So, and of course you have to take your online test on a laptop. So everything needs to be updated. We use a lockdown browser that needs to be the latest version. The computer needs to be updated, the updates need to go through. So keeping your technology in a working state better than normal is probably one of the best pieces of advice for me. Charged as well.
Okay, I'd like to thank you very much for your time, Dr. Coombe from Dubai Men's College, for speaking to us about preparing students with test-taking strategies. Thank you for joining us today. Share with us how you are using these tips. Leave us a comment or voice message on social media or at ttelt.org. Thanks for joining this episode of TTELT, brought to you by Educators Worldwide. Follow, like, and subscribe to TTELT on your social media, and try a new teaching tip today.